Thanks for coming to our session. So this is going to be Troubleshooting Microsoft Teams. First, I want to absolutely thank you for being here on a Friday of a conference. And we're going to go through a lot of things here for you.
Right.
Carolyn?
And hopefully you didn't all do the rocket last night. And there's some living brain cells. I did not do it. My name is Carolyn Blanding. I'm from Microsoft. I am a beta technical engineer working with our tap and preview customers, and I've had the great pleasure of working with Teams since the very first release to those customers.
And I'm Brian Wofford. I'm one of the fast-track Teams SMEs. I've been working with lots of different customers over the past year or so, helping them go through Teams enablement, starting to talk through some of the new transition things, et cetera.
During our session today, we'd like you to bear in mind that Microsoft Teams is built on Office 365 and powered by Skype. I'm going to steal a phrase that someone said this week. Teams is like a window pane to Office 365. So who here has been an administrator for Skype for Business Online or Skype for Business On-Prem? Right?
Yep.
Awesome. There's a lot more to think about, and we're going to try to touch on a few scenarios today to help you think about those things.
So our objectives today in this session are twofold. One, we want you to understand how to prevent problems, and we want you to understand what are the key pitfalls that you need to avoid. So the scenarios that we're going to be covering come from both our combined experience working with customers that are the most common and also have the highest impact.
And two, if you do find yourself stuck on the side of the road with a broken chain, no tools, and shoes not fit for walking, we hope to help you get back on the road quickly by identifying the problems and how to solve those problems.
So we've included guidance in the appendix of this deck also for all of these scenarios. So as we go through this, we're going to show you some things, some different scenarios, and we also have included ways to go through and try to fix those in the end. So if you want to use these, highly recommend you go download the deck after the fact. There'll be some things in the appendix for you there.
Right, we put those to the back so not to break the flow. And also before we continue, the person who's going to be presenting some scenarios to us today is a fictitious person and it's a fictitious company. Any resemblance to the real person is entirely coincidental. So getting under the hood of Teams. The good news for Teams, unlike like modern cars today, is we really don't actually have to lift up the hood and get greasy. We can actually use computer diagnostics to determine what's wrong with our Teams. And unlike a car, Teams is always plugged in.
Well, it's almost always plugged in.
Uh-oh, here we go. Why? What are you talking about?
Let me show you. So I got this dialog box here that says that somebody's pulled the plug on the internet.
Did you connect to the network they told us to connect to?
Yeah, maybe not. Let me see if I can fix that. Yeah, I was testing a lot of stuff before we got started, and maybe I need to go switch back in. I'll take a look at that really quickly.
So that's what we're talking about, being plugged in and not plugged in, of course, but user-facing diagnostics. That's a key diagnostic, obviously. We want our end users to know when they don't have connectivity as opposed to them just wondering why things aren't working. When we first lose connectivity, and you may have seen this, I mean, who's tried to use Teams on an airplane with go in flight, right? More often than not, you've seen that banner, right? We're having problems connecting. And if we lose the connection for more than a few minutes, then we get the you've been unplugged.
Yeah, so talking about UFDs, one of my favorites is actually you're talking while you're on mute. So how many times have you guys been in a call and you're just yammering away about things that are no topics and you're like, boop, boop, yeah, I'm still on mute. Hold on, let me figure out how to get off mute real quick. And it's oh, hold on, let me unmute, let me repeat my question and go back through that data with you again. Yeah. So that's a really cool UFD that we display and it helps out a lot of folks.
Yeah, it helps me out. I'm always on mute. Another user-facing diagnostic that was introduced pretty early in our actual preview program is this one. We had a change in Office 365 whitelisting for IPs and a considerable number of failures for customers to be able to make successful media connections to be able to join meetings. So this user-facing diagnostic was developed. The more information button there actually leads you to Office 365 IPs and URL whitelisting page for the correct information to understand how to configure your network to ensure media connectivity.
Yeah, so while we're talking about the URLs and IPs, really quickly, how many of you guys have had to go to security before, kind of hat in hand, and say, look, guys, I got these 10,000 ports I need and all these subnets that I need you guys to open, and just trust me, right? So we did a lot of work, and one of the things that we've done is we've now got this down to 2 subnets and 2 port ranges that need to be opened up for media. So this is a big, big improvement, and this makes it a lot easier for you to go and talk to your security teams and actually get them to help you with this process.
Right, and it's a lot easier to say, I just need this, as opposed to what you had to tell them before.
So, Carolyn, I've been upgraded from Skype on-prem Enterprise Voice to Teams, including direct routing for calling.
Oh, cool.
Well, maybe, but I made some test calls, and I've received a couple of inbound calls, but right now, I can't figure out how to make a call to save my life.
What do you mean you can't figure it out?
Let me show you again.
Okay.
So I go into my calls icon over here, and I don't have a dial pad. Like, I can't get in here to make a dial pad.
You don't have a dial pad?
Nope.
Okay, well that's not a good story. It's going to be a little bit difficult to make a PSTN call without a dial pad. I think we need to go troubleshoot this. Could you download the logs for me?
Yeah, but is there a keystroke or something to get to that?
Yes, Control-Alt-Shift-1. Does everybody know that one? Control-Alt-Shift-1. It's sort of like a game of Twister. Anyway, but that's the keystroke on Windows. Mac is slightly different. And what this does is it will download the diagnostic logs to your download folder.
All right, so I've got those open here, and
Great.
There's a lot of data.
Oh, that's really cool. I see you're using Visual Studio.
Yeah, I really like Visual Studio. I mean, it's kind of one of those where it makes it very easy for me to go through and look at the log files. Makes it be able to, for me to see how the extensions and stuff are there. More importantly, it's kind of got a built-in JSON format. I really like that. But how many of you guys have been using Snooper before, right, and had to always find a copy of Snooper to be able to look at logs? Well, nowadays with Teams, you can choose the text editor that you want to use. And all text editors will be able to open these files and take a look at the data. Now, one of the recommendations, as you'll see here, is this JSON. Anything that's got a JSON format in it, that makes it a lot easier.
Right. So before we actually start diagnosing Brian's problem, we just want to walk you quickly through the logs so that you have sort of some familiarity of what the log structure is about. So if you could scroll to the top.
Yep.
And just point out a couple of things since you're at the screen there.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So there are a lot of things up here at the top. So you can see, obviously, all the user agent information, what version of the client that we're on. I can also see my build dates. I can see my version information right here in the center. I can see a lot of the authentication states. So I can see kind of, is authentication working correctly? As we dig down a little bit, I actually see some data around the user that's logging in. So you can see here the family name and the given name in here. I can actually see this is who I am. This is who the user that's logging into the client is. I can also see their UPN, so I can see where that is. And then as we dig down just a little bit further, there's some really cool stuff in here. So you can actually see data around the desktop machine. So you guys know that we collect this data as the clients log in, but I can see that in the log. So in some cases I've had to in the past, hey, let me go figure out where this user is. And you can see in this lots of data around kind of what they're doing, where they are, what state that they're in. There's a lot of cool pieces to this.
Right, and then below the JSON formatted information, we get to the activity section of the log. This is top down. The most recent activity will be at the top. So that's where you'll see the current problems. And typically when we keep these logs rolling rapidly so they don't grow, if you do run into an issue, like perhaps you were trying to upload a file to SharePoint and you want to see what the error log is. I had someone come up to me this week about that exact same thing. They were missing the Files tab, or all the file tabs were returning an error. So I said, hit that File tab, download that log, look at that URL. Most likely, the URL, the name for that SharePoint site, is not going to match the name of the backend. Somebody made a change back there, and you'll be able to see what the correct name is, so you can fix that. So Brian, now let's take a look at your problem. Could you please search for me on calling support service? All one phrase, calling support service.
Got it. All right, I got some returns here.
Okay.
Yep, I see some data, so let's scroll over here and take a look, see if there's anything here.
Right. What I want you to look for is the phrase, is BYOT enabled?
Yep, I see that right here. Is BYOT enabled? It's set to false, Carolyn.
Can you zoom in a little bit so the audience can see? Okay, so is BYOT enabled false is telling me, this is what the determining factor is why we didn't return a dial pad in his client. BYOT was the original code name for bring your own trunk, which is now called our direct routing solution. I don't know if anybody here in the room was at the 9 o'clock session about that. So the direct routing solution requires that the user is assigned an online voice routing policy. If they're not assigned an online voice routing policy, then we won't display the dial pad because we don't want them to make a call and the call fail to route. So Brian is missing an online voice routing policy.
Yeah, so that actually makes sense, Carolyn. Thanks for sharing. I guess maybe I should talk to my provisioning team because chances are good if I'm seeing this problem, there's more people in my organization that are also seeing this problem.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody ran the wrong script. So just to recap, that's what you'll see. And before I move forward, probably no one here in this room, except for Francoise, who just walked in, sorry for calling you out there, has seen this screen. What we're currently doing today in market is we're hiding the calls tab when PSTN calling capability is not available, but that's changing very rapidly. So within a few weeks, the experience will change. So Brian has a new experience. In the new experience, you'll see the call tab in the left rail if the user has one-to-one VoIP capabilities, but you won't see the dial pad if they're missing an online voice routing policy, which is the case with Brian's account there. You can see his SIP address and the online voice routing policy is null.
So we've also included a table in the back of the appendix for some other things that you'll see and some other things that may cause the dial pad to not be there and things of that nature. So
Right.
Again, lots of good data in the appendix of this deck for you, other things that you can look for.
Good call out, thanks. So now we want to walk through quickly. We won't belabor it because I'm not going to actually demo this. I think we're all familiar in this room, or most of us are, I shouldn't make that assumption, with using remote PowerShell. To fix Brian's problem, quite simply, we have to assign him an online voice routing policy. Once we've assigned that online voice routing policy and we've confirmed that we can see that set within the Skype for Business remote PowerShell, at that point, we'll need to wait a few minutes for replication to take place. It usually happens within a few minutes. And once it does, the Teams client will consume that policy and display the dial pad. Typically, we find, if you want to goose it along, you'll exit the client and restart it, which will force the policy check. But it does run every few minutes. In fact, if you download a weblog with the MS Diagnostics and you search for that phrase, the calling service, you'll see that it's repeatedly doing a check. So it's not a one-time check on startup, but most of us are impatient, so we usually quit the client, start the client 15 times in 5 minutes. That's how I do it. So why didn't the call connect? This is the diagnostic that you'll see when there's a call failure. Sorry, we couldn't connect that call.
Well, that's perfect timing, Carolyn, because before my dial pad went missing, believe it or not, I had some problems with outbound calls.
See how this day is
On one, it was an international call, and I heard, "The number you have dialed is not recognized. Please try again." I'm sure I had the right number, so I don't know what went wrong, and the message really didn't help me.
Well, that's good feedback. We've talked to engineering, and they actually have plans to provide normal SIP error code, in hopefully English, not 403s and 404s, in this diagnostic. But today, we do have an answer for you and for your support teams. We actually even have a new RBAC role around that, so you can assign users what was the phrase again, the Microsoft Teams communications support role. There's actually 2 of them, and it depends upon what level of detail they can see. We're not going to dive that deep into it. There was another session. I think that's happening now. But Brian, we can actually take a look at the call details.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and I actually did use Call Analytics to look up that failed call, so let me show you really quickly what I saw.
Excellent.
So I'm inside Call Analytics here. I've looked up my user, myself in this case, and scroll down to the call history, and I can see down here, here's my call. So I know that this occurred, so let me open this up real quick.
I need to get closer.
Take a look here. So I got a 403, right? And that's typically forbidden.
Right, well, take a look at the plus plus.
Oh, there's a plus plus in there.
All right, so that plus plus, that was a badly normalized call. So it looks like we have a problem in our tenant dial plan we need to fix. And 403 makes sense here, right? Because we didn't find a match on the number dialed, so therefore we didn't find a route. And really, if we go back to Skype for Business on-prem dial plans and I should say dial routes and PSTN usages, if we don't find a usage for a user, basically that call is forbidden, which is why we're seeing a 403, which is pretty esoteric for most people. But if you're in the know, you would have caught that right away, right?
So that's great, Carolyn. So how can I tell the dial plan normalization rules used by Teams clients? So in the Skype world, it was pretty easy, for me maybe. I would see a 200 OK in the tracing files whenever I was using Snooper.
That's a great question. We actually can see it. Can you go back into the logs that you were in before?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So in this case, I want you to search on dial plan policy.
All right, I got some hits.
Excellent.
And there's definitely some data in here. I scroll over. Well, there's a lot in here, Carolyn. I mean, I see all these normalization rules, and I see lots of patterns and translations.
Can you make that a little bit bigger?
I'm
having a hard time seeing it.
Yeah, I can't see all this out the end. I've just got a dot, dot, dot out there at the end. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. We have actually shared that feedback. We are pulling down the dial plan normalization rules, and it is actually visible in the logs. But I actually want to show you another way. Something that's quite interesting to do, especially when you're trying to understand policies that are retrieved by the client, and it just gives you kind of a good view shed into how we set things up from the back end to the client. Can you open up a browser?
Sure.
And then I want you to open up the dev tools using F12. And what we're going to have Brian do here now is we're going to do an actual trace using our browser with the dev tools while signing into the client. And what will happen at that point is we're going to be doing a step called orchestration. So who's familiar with the term bootstrapping? Right, so in Skype for Business Days, when you sign the client in, we bootstrap the client, right? So we went out to the server and we found all the settings, which was what Brian was talking about, the 200 OK back from the service request for the location dial plan. So what we're going to do now is kick off an orchestration, and then we're going to search for normalization.
Yep, so underneath this networking tab up here.
Right, thanks you. Go to the network tab.
Got it. Normalization over here on the right. Let's take a look here, see what we see. Oh, that's not easy to look at. Let me click on this formatting button up here. There we go.
We like the name of that format button. We promised we wouldn't say it today because it keeps cracking me up. It's called prettify or pretty, make it pretty. But that's kind of a common term in JSON. When they're making the format legible, they call it prettying it up or making it pretty. Okay, so.
Yep. So now I can easily see these normalization rules in here. And honestly, Carolyn, there's a lot more stuff in here too.
Right. So you can see, pulling down very similar to Skype for Business, if you're running a trace, you can actually see, we can see the normalization rules. Why don't you show them some of the other data that's available?
Yeah, so there's definitely some things in here around, I can see some of my meeting policies that are getting applied and things of that nature as well. All of that's captured right here.
Right. So this is very helpful. You know, you can actually see, just like you could, it's not captured in a static log, but it is available if you fire up a trace during orchestration process. Okay. Did I pass through something I did? Sorry. We took a screenshot there in case we had a network problem. Yep. So moving on, troubleshooting call quality. You can troubleshoot call quality and reliability on a single call. We can troubleshoot the call, which we just saw here by going into call analytics. But then we can also use the call quality dashboard. And what that will let us do is actually troubleshoot in a more systemic. We can find problems across our network. We can find problems with devices. And this is a very proactive as well as reactive way. I'm not doing a deep dive. There's actually a session for those of you who are here. You're missing that session, but you can watch it after the fact. And that session is right there, BRK.
3169.
Thank you, 3169. Yep.
Yeah, so we also have specific guidance around this in Fast Track for our customers to help them leverage CQD and help them ensure an excellent customer experience. By the way, have you guys seen the new quality experience reports in the call quality dashboard yet?
Yeah, these are awesome. So before these were available, they were developed by some of our really talented folks in the company, and they were available externally that you could add them, but now they're built in. So when you go into the call quality dashboard, you already have pre-canned reports that can let you see things like, you know, calls by devices, by network region, et cetera. So it really makes it a lot easier to get this data accessible to you.
Yeah, and a lot of the work that we do out of the Fast Track Center is really going through with these, the CQD and the QER reports that you're seeing, helping customers, again, to try to help to understand how to diagnose your network issues, how to make sure that you are providing your users with the best experience when they start to use Teams.
Thanks, Brian.
So just one more thing, Carolyn. I got a couple of email notifications for voicemail, but I can't get to voicemail in Teams. The diagnostic message just says, we can't connect to your voicemail right now.
Okay, we can't really demo this because we didn't fix this dial pad issue. So without a dial pad, we actually don't get voicemail today. So we took a screenshot of the problem, and is this what you're seeing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I see. We can't get to your voicemail right now.
Okay, so could you do me a favor and go back into the web logs?
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's see if we can find the error message. Did you switch feeds?
Yep, hold on.
Sorry.
There we go. All right, so I'm in here. What am I looking for this time, Carolyn?
Voicemail-list. I mean, you could just search on voicemail too. But.
Got it. I see an error code right here in the middle. I see a 404. So let's slide over here and see what we see. Oh, yeah, look at this right here. So I see REST API is not yet supported for this mailbox. Let me zoom that in real quick.
Brian, is your mailbox on-prem?
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's Exchange 2016 CU3. I read that we supported that, right?
We do. We do for the most part. But there's a couple of things. We're trying to get there. We're getting close. We're a lot closer than we were last year. We actually have a page feed. We actually have a page which I've referenced on the slide on the left. On this page, we have a table that lists all of the various features, and depending upon where your mailbox is home, whether or not that feature is available. And it does show you there that voicemail is not available today. So we have a problem that we need to resolve to make that happen. Users will be able to get the voicemail through Outlook. We know that's not optimal. We are working on it.
So, Carolyn, I got another problem here. Starting to use
I'm getting
guest
tired.
access. Well, starting to use guest access a lot. How many of you guys are using guest access now? Yeah, well, a handful. And I can't add people to Teams. I can't add any guests into my Teams.
Okay, there's a few things that could be going on here. Could you share exactly what you're seeing?
Yeah, let me show you again what I've got. So I go into my team. I click on a general tab here. I go into the team itself. I click on add a member, and I type in, let's just try to add you. No matches.
So no, we're failing even to search externally. That's an easy one. That means that Teams itself, at the tenant level, has been configured with guest access off, right? That's pretty simple. So if we don't have guest access turned on, users will not be able to add any guests at all to a team. That's prohibitive. So this pretty simple dialogue, Brian.
Yeah, but so what happens if I turn this off after I've added a whole bunch of people as guests? Do they get to hang around?
No, I'm really glad you asked that question. So, very important to understand when we're administrating Teams. Do not turn on guest access if you haven't gone through an internal security review, and then only to have them come around and do that security review, and they say turn it off. If you turn it off after the fact and people have added guests to Teams, they will all be removed from the Teams. And that might be fine for testing, but it could be pretty bad if it was external people that were actually participating in your org.
But this isn't the only setting that impacts the ability to add guests, right, Carolyn?
Right, and we're covering this because this is complicated. There's a few places that we have to make setting changes, and those setting changes affect the experience in different ways. And I missed it. So at the core, the very first setting that needs to be turned on, and is enabled by default, is at the Azure AD setting. Azure Active Admin Center under users, external users. There's a setting there, the one that's in purple box, members can invite. If that is turned off, users, owners of Teams, cannot add guests to a Teams.
Yeah, so we see this with customers in Fast Track, and they want to have control over their guest accounts, right? So maybe they've got a workflow or something similar in place where they have an authentication process or something like that where they go through before the accounts will get added into Azure AD. Once they're in Azure AD, they then can then be added to a team.
Right, that's a good one, right? So if you want to have a little bit of control, you have a workflow in place, you can actually turn this off, and they'll be able to add guests to a team if they exist in Azure AD, but otherwise they won't be able to. And then there's another one. This is the most restrictive. If this is turned off, and what I'm talking about by this, in Office 365 groups is another setting. So that's actually in the Office 365 Admin Center under Services and Add-ins, we go to groups. And within there, there's a setting there to allow members to invite people to groups, external people to groups. If that is off, game's over. Only admins would be able to add people to groups or teams, and that's whether or not they exist in Azure AD or not. So this is the most restrictive setting. I don't think we've had customers do this one, but then you could have a very restrictive workflow where the only way a user gets into a team is if an administrator adds them.
Yeah, and one more setting to be aware of is a per group setting. So that can be done via PowerShell. It's a flag called allow add guests. So a tenant admin could potentially leverage a script that would allow you to limit guest access in the group based on the classification. One example is that here within Microsoft, we disable guest access for any team that's been marked as high business impact.
Right, and important to know, because if you're a Teams administrator or Skype for Business administrator, you may not have any view shed into the fact that this had been going on historically at a group level by the people who manage the Office 365 groups. So we want to talk about Teams coexistence from a troubleshooting perspective. I'm sure maybe some of you here have seen a couple of sessions on coexistence. Have you? No? New topic for you? New topic? So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Carolyn, since I've been upgraded to Teams, people are telling me that they were getting email notifications that I'm trying to reach them in Teams. And when I was using Skype, I never had that problem. They always seem to get the message.
Okay. Is this what they're reporting that they're seeing, that they're missing the action in Teams?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're seeing.
And you want to know why?
I do want to know why.
Islands mode. So, I know you're giving me a quizzical look. Islands mode. So this gets to be a tough topic, but in islands mode, if the recipient is in islands mode, the message routing is based on the sender. You're in Teams, right?
Yep.
You're sending them a message, and they're getting you're missing the action in Teams email because they're not signed into Teams. Do you remember that when you were running before your upgrade, you had to run both Skype for Business and Teams all the time?
Yeah, I had them both running all the time, and in fact, I'm really, really happy to just have one client again.
Right. Well, hopefully soon they'll all be in the same state you are.
So while on the topic of call routing, we have some customers that report that their users are complaining when they click on the call notification. So some calls get picked up on their BTOE connected Polycom and not on their headset. Why is that happening, Carolyn?
Okay, well, anybody know the answer? Islands mode.
All right, hold on. So you mean the call is a Teams call, it's routed to Teams. My God, my head hurts. So why did they get a Skype notification on a Polycom device? Is the Polycom phone both a Skype phone and a Teams phone now?
Good questions, and yes. In order to enable our customers to leverage their existing third-party IP phones, we've done plumbing in the background so that calls for Teams calls will route to those phones, right? So in a sense, that phone is acting like Teams endpoint. Now, to your question about the better together experience, this is where it gets a little fun. So the end user is running a Teams client, at least on their 3-pip phone, but hopefully also on their desktop. And they also have a Skype for Business client running with a better together experience to that Polycom third-party phone. And that service is designed to always pop a toast on an inbound call. So the Teams call comes in, it rings the Polycom device, which causes the toast to pop. User clicks to answer the toast, but is this a Skype call? It's a Teams call. So that call can't possibly route to that user's headset. It really needs to route to that Teams endpoint. But of course, go to explain to the user why some calls they can pick up on their headset, but other calls they can only pick up on the phone, right? So for production enterprise voice users who've switched over to Teams for calling, I would suggest upgrading them. and not running that dual stack.
That makes a lot of sense, Carolyn. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So while we're talking about IP Skype phones, one more thing I wanted to share. We had a customer who just completed their migration from Skype on-prem using enterprise voice. Now their Teams online with direct routing, and they report that the calls from Teams were successful, but calls from the IP phone were failing due to normalization failures.
Oh, I had a case just like that. You want to share why?
Yeah, sure. So Teams works because it's looking at the online dial plan. It'll never look for an on-prem dial plan. The phones, however, were failing to look up the on-prem dial plan because the users were disabled for enterprise voice on-prem. So the tenant hybrid configuration was still set with the default value to use on-prem. Our advice to customers is don't change your users on-prem configuration. Wait until you're ready to go through full deprecation of that on-prem. That way you don't cause any service disruptions.
Right. So I'm just going to reiterate that because that's probably might be a little confusing if you're not familiar with the settings. So remember, the 3-pip phone, really, we route calls to it as a Teams client, but still under the hood, it's still a Skype client, right? And the Skype client is designed to look up the dial plan rules in a certain way. If the tenant configuration is set to use an on-prem dial plan, we're going to look on-prem for that dial plan. If the user that was moved to enterprise voice or PSTN calling online, on-prem setting was disabled for enterprise voice, we're going to get back that 403 forbidden that the person's not UC enabled, right? So we're not actually going to be able to retrieve that dial plan. So as Brian said, you really don't want to go changing those settings. Because you've moved the user, leave the settings alone, please. They're fine. They're not going to hurt anything. I also worked with a customer who was migrating from on-prem to online with direct routing for voice. And their integrator thought it would be a really great idea to clean up the line URIs on-prem and then set them online. It was a great idea, except for a couple things. One, they didn't have access to Azure AD Connect, so the synchronization didn't happen. So they cleared out the line URI on-prem, didn't synchronize. They then ran a script to set the line URI online, which failed, but they ignored the failure. They said, oh, that doesn't matter, okay? So, and it was fine, it was all good, it worked. Calls routed inbound. And then AD sync ran some hours later. Null value for phone number on-prem synchronized to online. And guess what happens in inbound calls? They failed, 404. So, best leave it alone. We actually, in all honesty, owe you a story going forward for once they're all there, how do you clean up? But for now, as you're migrating users, leave the on-prem settings as they are. Well, now we want to move into Teams Federation. How many here have been using Teams for Federation at all? How's that going? I'm sorry I asked. I walked right into that one.
So, believe it or not, Carolyn, I got another problem. So I was just trying to reach Fabrice. He's at our California subsidiary address, and that's failing for me. I can't get to him.
Can you show us what's going on?
Yeah, let me switch over here and show you again. So I'm going to click on my chat icon up here. I'm going to type his name in.
So as he's doing this, you notice as he's typing now, eventually we get up this search externally.
Yep,
and
so
that's our Federation experience.
Oh, I got an error message here.
What does it say?
It says we're unable to set up the conversation because the contact you entered wasn't found.
That name there, contact, are you sure you have it right?
I don't know. Let me double check. Yeah, no, that's the wrong domain. That's the wrong domain. Let me go fix that.
He fixed that one. I'm good. I can go home.
So the important part to recognize there is that when you're talking to external contacts, it's very important that you get the naming right. You're actually typing that in and not looking them up. So as we go through here, let me type the right name in this time. Let's see what we get this time. All right, well, that's another error, but what's this one? Can't set up the conversation because my organizations aren't set to talk to each other?
I know the answer.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. I know the answer. Do you know the answer? Well, it's not islands mode. for those of you who are about to jump in with that answer. Okay, so what's going on here is that for Teams Federation works a little bit different than Skype Federation. It's an online service, right? So do you think it can look at on-prem policies? No. So it's going to look for online policies. And it's going to look for those online policies, and this is an interesting departure a little bit because we're not doing SIP. So it's not a SIP invite with a response back and all that great stuff. When we set up the conversation between the sender and receiver, we're actually tracking policies for both the tenant and user on sender and receiver side, and we're doing that online. So in this case, we have a hybrid tenant setup, and we have some users online, we have some users on-prem, and we have policies that exist for Federation on-prem and online, and apparently, we made a change to our on-prem to add a new domain to the allow list and failed to do that to the online allow list. And so what we have here is a typical scenario you'll hear is it worked in Skype and it's not working in Teams. And that means our online policies are missing. And in all honesty, right now, the way that works for even customers who haven't actively configured hybrid, if they have a Skype for Business online service instance, means they set up one user in their tenant, right? Just one, because they were fooling around with it. They set up Federation to be allowed by an allow list, because that's how they do it on-prem. But they abandon it because they weren't ready to move, and they completely forgot about it. That's there. We're reading that. So lessons learned for yourselves, for your customers, if you're integrators, be sure that any customer who has an Office 365 online instance, please make sure that those policies match their on-prem policies, whether or not they've actively started to walk down the hybrid configuration road. Okay, so this is another scenario. So this happened a lot, and I think it'll still continue to happen, but we certainly saw this early days of testing. I have Teams Federation, right? So I'm set up for Teams Federation, and my partner set up for Teams Federation, and he's using Teams to send me a message, and I get an email message saying that I missed the conversation in Skype. Oh, I'm confused. And worse, if I send him the message from Teams, he can respond back, and I get it back. Why is that?
Islands mode?
Islands mode. Exactly correct. It's islands mode again.
So hold on. I thought that you told me earlier that routing was based on the sender.
I did tell you that.
All right.
Okay. So I know it all gets tricky, but this is a good story. This is by intent. We couldn't really think that all the people in the world have started their journey in Teams and that they know how to set up all the policies, et cetera. We needed to pick a route that's going to hit most users. So a very intelligent decision we made is let's continue to route to Skype, right? So if we send a message to a user, we will route that message to Skype unless that user has been upgraded to Teams. Obviously, we need to route it to Teams at that point or they'll fail to get the message. So in Federation, the story is a little bit different. It's simpler. We always route to Skype unless the user's been upgraded to Teams. Does that make sense? You less confused?
A little bit less confused. I think that makes sense to me.
Okay.
So you've been an awesome help today, but I still got another problem, believe it or not.
Okay, what's your problem?
Well, so someone deleted a channel that I created.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think that the problem was maybe I was a little overzealous and created a whole bunch of owners. And now I kind of need to recover it. And more importantly, I'd really love to know who did that.
Okay, well, two things. One, well, actually a few things, but two, I'll start with two. It's good that you created more than one owner, okay? Because having a single owner on a team can be a little tricky if we lose that owner from that team and we need to get ownership back.
Yeah, it's a bit of a support pain to fix though when a single owner of a team is no longer in Azure, right?
Right. And another thing is that with owners will be able to delete channels, but if you want to restrict how many people, if they're just members, you can actually do a setting there to prevent members from deleting channels. But we have some good news. Good news now is recovering that channel will be easy. And I have even better news for you. We can find out who did it.
What?
Yep.
All right. Let's switch over here. Walk me through it.
Okay. So can you please go over to the team where you're missing the channel?
Yep, I'm here. I see all my channels here.
Okay. Click on that.
Oh, look at that. I've got one that's deleted down here in the channels tab.
Okay.
That's it. That's the Q4 planning channel. That's the
All
one
you
I need
need
back.
All you need to do there is hit restore.
This is it. I
That's
click on
it.
restore.
Yep.
Well, look at that. It's back.
Awesome.
All right, that's fantastic, but it doesn't help me figure out who did it.
Okay. Can you go over to our help desk channel, please?
Yeah.
And you should see an email notification there.
Oh, I do. I see a notification that says there was a deleted channel. Well, let me expand this a minute. Let's see what else is in here. Yep, channel deleted. Oh, look, it was Abby. Abby's the one that actually deleted this channel. I can see that.
Okay, don't be too hard on her.
All
It's
right.
most likely she just made the wrong choice when she right-clicked. She wanted to unfollow your channel and she deleted it. So auditing, this is great, something we never really had in Skype for Business. There's a lot of great options for doing auditing. And as you can see, you can even send messages to channels for notifications.
So one of our customer recommendations through Fast Track is for customers to set up the alerts into a channel email address. So what this will do is it actually gives you the ability for your support organization to follow that address, and they can all see as updates occur in that channel. It makes it very easy for you to go through and find out when things are happening. And this can be any of the alerts that you can see in terms of auditing. Anything that you can audit on, you can pipe into a channel address. This is just one other way that you can actually utilize Teams to help make your job a little bit easier.
Right, and so this is a great troubleshooting tip, right? You really do want to set up auditing. And there's a lot of options, which we've screenshot here. Deleting channels, deleting teams, really important because the data only stays for 30 days. You, just like exchange mailboxes, right? You have 30 days. So you really don't want to find out about this on the 31st day when the person whose channel or team deleted woke up to the fact that that had happened. So setting up alerts for this is really important. You can also set up alerts for organizational changes, sort of like guest access. You're not necessarily surprised when something changes and you were, caught unawares that that change happened. Even if you're just a support person who needs to understand what policies are being changed within your org so you know how to manage that support service.
All right, so I lied. I got another problem.
Last one, I hope.
Well, so I've been trying to use this new meeting recording option in Teams, and it's fantastic, but it's grayed out right now. And I checked my meeting policies, and I set where recording is allowed. Why is this not available to me?
That's a good question. So we actually have 3 things that control the availability of the recording button, and that's by intent. So the first one is the Teams meeting policy. But the second one is whether or not you actually have a streaming license, because Stream is the back-end service for our cloud meeting recording. If you don't have a license for Stream, having a recording button won't do you a lot of good, because what will happen when you're done recording, it'll fail. It'll fail to actually send that data up to Stream. So we'll hide that button in that case.
Oh, right. So that totally makes sense, Carolyn. I was waiting on permission for a license. I know that my company right now is currently limiting Stream to people in certain roles, and I guess I just haven't got the approval yet.
Probably not. That would explain it. And then there's a third one, which is similar and related, is the ability to actually upload video to Streams. Customers may give their users a license for consumption, but not actually to upload. So again, if a user doesn't have the ability to upload a video, we'll actually gray out that button as well. And then finally, you can see at the bottom there, some companies will have a requirement that users sign an agreement for the usage. So there's a fair usage, and they have to read it and agree to it. What's really nice now, which wasn't there in the very early days of TAP, which was a bit of a snafu, is that we actually do pop a message. So the user, as they do their very first recording, will get prompted that they have to read the agreement and agree and accept that policy. And that happens right in line when they're doing the recording.
That makes sense, Carolyn. Thank you. So one of my favorite quotes is, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure."
I like that quote too. And if you don't want to have a day like I just had, what we really recommend and there's a lot to grasp, and there's a lot more for you to understand. There's a much bigger stack behind Teams than there was for Skype for Business, right? So you really need to do your homework. You really need to be ready. The first, of course, is network readiness, right? We started off with the session at the very beginning with Brian having a problem with network connectivity. Teams is a service, right? And if the users can't connect to our service for any reason, they're not going to have a very good experience. There's been several good sessions on network. One call out here is BRK, and I can't read it from here, BRK4013. If you haven't seen that session, you definitely want to check it out. But really, network readiness is key number one.
And as we said earlier, Teams really is kind of the window into Office. So make sure that you've reviewed all the O365 workloads and all the settings. There's a lot of things that can impact Teams. You want to make sure that all of those are there for you. More importantly, utilize Fast Track. You've got some ability there. We've got a team there that's ready to help do enablement, help you walk through some of this process, making sure that as you take the journey towards Teams, you start enabling it for your organization. You're thinking through all of those things that you need to do and checking all those boxes, making sure that as you start to enable this for your community, they get a good experience. That's what we need. In addition to what we covered today, there's also many other Ignite sessions, and there's lots of resources referenced in this deck that'll give you some more things on how to prepare your journey to Teams.
Right. Thanks, Brian. So we went through this pretty rapidly. We did that by intent. We want to spend a lot of time with questions and answers because we think that you'll have those questions. We hope that we've given you some good information to help you avoid breakdowns.
Yeah, we hope today's session actually help you avoid all those pieces and really help you get back on the road quickly.
Right. Thank you.
So the other thing that you'll see here at the end of the deck, we actually did on purpose leave a lot of time for Q&A just because of what this session is. We're hoping that you guys do have some questions for us. As with every session you've been to, please make sure you go through and fill out the invites for this, the evaluations for this, giving us some feedback, letting us know. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Hopefully you're getting good things out of it. And with that, let's open it up to some Q&A. If you guys don't mind, if you've got questions, please come to the microphone so that we can get it on the recording for others.
Is it on?
Excellent, thank you.
There we go.
First up, guys, thanks for making that fun because this can usually be a little bit of a dry session the last day of Ignite, so thank you. Really like the Control-Alt-Shift-1 to get the logs on the client side. Mm-hmm. Are there any plans to be able to retrieve that from the back end as an administrator rather than having a user having to do that for us?
That's a good question. So you'd like to see like what we can see. So this is all being pushed up to telemetry. I don't have the answer to that. I like that feedback. We will take that feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Over here, yes.
What exactly is island mode?
Good question. It's actually a pretty simple question. I'm missing my little stickers. I like doing it with stickers. But Islands Mode is designed for customers when they're starting to map their journey for Teams, is to be able to run both clients in full stack, meaning all features and functionality in both clients are available so that a user can use chat, calling, meetings in both clients. In addition to Teams, they can use the collaboration features. Obviously, that means that users can be dual stacking those activities, but that's by intent because you need to understand how it works and what will work for you. Does calling work in your enterprise the way you have things configured? Is it compatible with all your systems? So it gives you a chance to go through that evaluation mode, gives users a chance to experience it, gets you an idea of where you want to go. But once you start your journey, once you start thinking about where you want to move forward, how you want to move forward, you'll probably start picking other modes. The Teams upgrade mode, obviously you only use Teams, and then I'm not going to go into depth, that was covered in other sessions, but you have other Skype for Business modes that are emerging that give you the ability, and Francoise can add to that.
May I offer a shameless plug for a session that was given on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. It's called BRK3120, 3142. The recording will answer that question completely. It will also give you the recommended modes depending on which configuration you're in.
Yep.
Thank you, Francois. Because I didn't remember the number. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I by accident deleted a channel, and I find out on day 32. What are my options?
There really aren't. I don't believe we have options because the data only, so like recovery, you're familiar with Exchange mailboxes. Yep. SharePoint's the same way. All that data is set to be retained for 30 days. However, if you have retention set to hold on to the data longer, you should have access to both the chat and the data if you have retention policy set to keep that data around. So I think it will depend upon what you've got set up in your organization, and it would be recoverable through the retained data.
Okay.
But it won't be so easy as just
Not in the interface. Yep.
pressing restore.
Okay. Thanks.
Welcome.
Sure.
Yes, sir, over here.
Hey, so just a question. You went through a scenario where you can't add guest users to a team, and I know one thing that we ran into is we had someone who created a team. They could add some guest users, but there were certain accounts that like this one user would never work.
Okay.
And we went through trying to delete the account out of Azure, the guest account out of Azure AD, re-add it. Still didn't work. I mean, it was teams to teams. It was the other, both tenants had teams enabled, and it was just a certain user couldn't be.
Well,
added. So-
that's interesting. We've certainly run into the scenario you're talking about where, and when you say you couldn't add them, or the person who was a guest couldn't sign in,
a person who was a guest couldn't sign in.
right? I actually had that scenario, and I pulled it because I thought, maybe that wasn't universal problem. We had that problem a lot at Microsoft, and the history on that is legacy accounts were created prior to the new guest accounts, and there's a thing called security ID, and the security ID mapping for the guest account doesn't map back to the home tenant. So what happens is when the user goes to sign into Teams, every time they sign in, when they try to switch tenants, they keep looping back to their home tenant, and they never are able to switch tenants. And if you look at the desktop logs, which are different than the diagnostic logs and are actually available from right-clicking on the notification icon, right, Teams notification icon, it says get logs, that's desktop logs. If you search for tenant switching, you can actually find error messages in there related to the failed login. But you said you deleted the account, because typically deleting the guest account in Azure AD and letting it get recreated resolves the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it was specific. This is going back a while now, so I'm not sure if it ever got resolved. I
Okay.
ignored them.
That's been a fairly common problem. We had that with a lot of users at Microsoft because we've been adding guests to Microsoft Tenant for as long as it was available in SharePoint. So I think we had a huge failure rate related to those legacy accounts.
And it's good feedback that it's not in the it's in the other logs, not the first logs you showed us how to get.
It's in the, Brian, do you have you want to show them fast?
Yeah, it'd be in the client log here.
Yeah, I guess you get the client logs and the diagnostic logs, which are not the client logs.
Right,
Plus the server logs.
there's diagnostic logs are really what the nuts and bolts of the activities and what goes on. The desktop logs really only pertains to off, and those are available if you right-click. Can you show them in the tray?
Yeah,
If
in
you
the tray.
right-click on Teams in the notification tray, there's an option to get logs. And those are the desktop logs. Again, it's not all that activity that we're talking about. It's really very restrictive to just what happens during the auth process. Tenant switching is an auth process, so if you need to troubleshoot tenant switching, this is where you would go to look. And you could just search on tenant switching. I hope that answered your question?
That helps, thanks.
Okay, sure.
Let's go back over here. Yes, sir. How can we help?
We are seeing kind of the same thing even today with guest access. Where I'm seeing that is we have customers that we're inviting to external teams for projects. We set them up for Office 365 and give them guest access into our team. We then set their Office 365 tenant up, license them with Teams, and it breaks. And the user's able to get in via incognito, so it is definitely something dealing with that client and the credentials on that client or something. But we've got about 3 or 4 occurrences across 3 or 4 different customers where we're
Yeah, well, that's going to take a deep dive. I can't answer that off the cuff.
Yeah.
But were they originally using a Microsoft account, like they had Gmail
Yes.
set up?
Yes.
And now they're trying to use the same address with a corporate? Because that won't work.
I can just tell you that, no, it's a Microsoft account, and then
Yeah.
they got licensed, and it broke. When we
There's definitely an issue there. If they're using exactly that same SMTP address that's associated with the Microsoft account, which they're now associating with an Office 365 account, that's going to cause issues. I don't know off the top of my head how to resolve that, but that, basically we've got a conflict in security IDs there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a hello.
Yep.
I have a couple of questions about the upgrade modes. Teams only. Is that chip? Can we configure that?
Excuse me? I couldn't hear that. Could you repeat that question?
At the Teams only upgrade mode, can we use that already?
Yes, you can use that already.
Okay.
Is it available within your modern portal, or you don't see it yet?
I don't see it in the modern port, but I can configure it with the shell.
You can configure it PowerShell. Francois, question on that for you. If they configure it today, can they just do the upgrade policy?
It's good to do the into-out policy as well.
Okay. So we have guidance. Francois wrote some good guidance out there on docs.microsoft.com specifically about the coexistence mode. So if you search on coexistence mode, you'll find that. I believe that was covered in a session he mentioned earlier this week. If you're going to do it through PowerShell, until we expose that in your modern portal, you'll need to set 2 policies.
Then the next one, Skype for Business with Teams call up only. Do you have any timelines when it will come?
So, the Skype for Business with Teams Collab only mode, you can, in some cases, in some tenants, set through PowerShell already, but those modes require 2 different things. They require a component of routing, which is done through the upgrade policy that can already be achieved, and a component of user experience, which depends on a new policy called the App Permissions Policy, which is in the process of being released in Q4. With migration and so on, that's not yet available. So we make it available only in limited manners for now as a preview. You can arrive at the same user experience, and that's something we can detail separately, but through the use of meetings policy, messaging policy, and calling policy. And then we'll migrate the settings later. So if in the interim you need to do something like this, you can, but it's a mock-up, and then we'll do a migration of settings.
And the last one, is there a reason why, if you deploy a new tenant, it's in the legacy mode?
That's because we're still working through. It's quickly changing, so that's a very short-term thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Welcome.
Hi. When we first tried to work with Teams, we played around and we renamed Team, and it caused all kinds of weird things to happen. Documents we couldn't access anymore. Is that better now? Does that work better? We're too scared
You
to try it.
renamed the team itself, not the back-end SharePoint.
Correct.
I think we fixed that, didn't we? That we can rename the
Pretty
teams?
well.
Yeah, I know you can rename the team. There's still
We
something.
fixed that. That will fix it. The back end, that never changes. It's just a display name, so we can't really change the actual root name because that's where everything's referenced. But I believe we fixed that part. What you don't want to do is go to back of SharePoint and start renaming things.
Right.
That'll
So when you do
break
a,
things.
when you
I
do a
should have
team-
called. Yeah, go ahead.
when you do a team rename, the SharePoint backend name will stay the same, regardless of what that team name is.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have called that out. I had a lot of questions from SharePoint administrators. I mean, the thing about it is Teams is administrating SharePoint. That's the bottom line. Your SharePoint administrators should not be administering Teams SharePoint sites.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very welcome. Yes, sir. Over here.
Common question from customers who are looking at Teams meetings for the first time, and one of the things that they're used to is the ability to have the meeting call them back. I've had several customers, and I apologize, this is an overlap with earlier content, I came in late, is they want to try out Teams meetings. They've gotten themselves a PSTN conferencing license and assigned it appropriately to the user.
Mm-hmm.
They've allowed for dial back in their policies, but an attempt to have Teams call them back fails silently with no error message. The call just kind of goes nowhere. How would you go about troubleshooting that?
That's a good question because that's at a service level. So I'm not sure. I mean, the customer is going to have to call support for that, right?
Yeah, they'd have to get a ticket open to see
Because-
what's actually happening on the back end.
Is there anything they can do from the client-side logs that would take a look at that?
I think the client-side message, not even, because at that point, we're not hitting the client, right? I mean, it's the service is instigating that callback. So I don't think that, I mean, even for Skype for Business Online, callback out from the conference doesn't display anywhere in the client. That's all at the service level.
Okay, and that was the advice that I had given the customer, was at that point, I think you're clearly sending the event request, and something in the service is failing to be able to call you back. You've either got PSTN block, you've got a routing pattern that conflicts somewhere in your tenant, or more importantly, it's going to require access to the back end, and unfortunately, that means you're going to need to open a Premier case.
You know, I'm thinking because I'm even, you know, in call analytics, that dial backs out from the conference, so yeah.
We've been checking those in call analytics, and it shows no event in call analytics.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah.
frustrating.
I mean, truly, that's where we have to get the ops folks to start looking at the service level logs. Yeah.
And that's good, because that was effectively what I had told them at the time, but it's good to have that confirmed.
You're right. Well, that's a different.
Yeah, the question was around also needing communication credits to do dial back.
You do need communication credits if you're dialing outside of region, but you don't need communication credits if you're dialing within region, right? So based on your domestic and international dialing plans. And that had changed too. At one point it was wide open and we had all this, but that's gone. You do need communication credits if you're outside. Right, is it only for audio conferencing?
Yeah,
right.
This is a U.S. tenant with PSTN conferencing assigned, so it's not the $0. So they shouldn't need callback in the U.S. domestic without having consumption credits.
Right. And don't we do it, we would provide a voice treatment now too, don't we?
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, so they should hear that. I think we resolved that.
But I think you would be correct if this were out of region for the PSTN callback, that would be correct.
Do we have any more questions?
Anything else? One more?
Is it possible to move Wikidata from a channel in one team over to a different team?
Not that I'm aware of, certainly not through the user interface. I don't know if you could do that somehow through some copy-paste maybe, but you're actually moving a whole blob of data.
Yeah, we've tried it. We've had some customers ask us about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be possible right now.
It means tied specifically to that site and team.
Yeah, so a suggestion there would be, and as you guys have these ideas and you're running into things, please go out to user voice. I think you've probably heard that from us this week a lot as well. Go out to the Microsoft Teams user voice and put those entries in there. We're seeing those, we're paying attention to those, and we're reacting to what's out there. So that's a very valid ask.
There actually is a user voice on this. I've seen it, so I've added my name to it.
And you've already voted?
Yes, I did.
Cool.
And I've seen the same request for conversation history too, to be able to move.
Right, well that's definitely something we've talked about too, especially now that we've introducing some other granular permissions. Okay.
Cool. That's it.
That's it. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for spending your Friday with us. Hopefully this was informative. If you've got further questions, you want to do some one-on-one, we're going to hang out for just a little bit over here in the corner. You're welcome to come up and talk to us if you'd like. Thanks again, guys. Have a great rest of your week.